Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be going over a used transmission. So over the weekend I picked up a used cable SI transmission from a friend of a friend for $100 Canadian. As you know, these transmissions are getting very uncommon to find, and mine currently has a diff problem, or at least a diff bearing problem with the oil leak and everything. So it's best to have a spare transmission regardless. So I picked this up and I'll go over the steps that I took to inspect this transmission. It's not the most foolproof way, but it's basically the only method you got when you're not really pulling the whole transmission apart. The only way to really determine if the transmission is good or not is by pulling it all apart and inspecting all the stuff internally. But we're not going to be doing that today. We're going to just be going over what the simple steps are and what to look for when you're actually inspecting a used transmission. So let's just get to it. Alright guys, so here's the used SI transmission that I picked up. So first things first is you want to make sure it's an SI transmission, so you want to make sure that you have the right year. So these two lines here determine that it is a 1990 or a 91. If it's one line is 89, something like that, just look it up online. But this is a 1990-91. We also did the input shaft marking. So we marked it here and we marked the blue mark in here. And then we spun this 10 times and we determined that where the blue mark ends up, which is right below the quarter mark down here. And that determines that it is a SI transmission. So we did that. So we know that this is a SI transmission. Next thing, you want to look at all these bolt holes. Make sure that there's nothing stripped. Check over the whole casing. Make sure that there isn't any cracks or anything like that. As you can see here, there is some damage. This is the speed sensor. It's cable-driven speed sensor. And they tried to remove it, it looks like, and was unsuccessful because these things commonly do seize. It's not uncommon to see it like this. So it's not going anywhere. So as long as I'm able to put my cable in there and it's able to spin the cable, it should be fine. I don't see anything stuck inside or anything. So this should be fine the way it is, because if they can't pull it out, this 10mm bolt really isn't going to be able to, prevent it from falling out or really anything, right? It's usually just 10mm bolt holding this in, and it is what it is. Next, you will need a screwdriver. So basically here is your shift rod. It would probably be easier if you pull this shift boot out. So you can pull this out, easy slide it off. So as you can see here, this is where you would stick your screwdriver. So now what you want to do is make sure it's in neutral first. Just check neutral, and you want to spin the input shaft. So you gotta make sure that it spins freely, smooth. As you go into any gear, as you select the different gear, you will feel a little bit more of a resistance, but it should still spin smoothly. It shouldn't, bind up or anything like that. Right now, this spins fine. Also, you want to make sure the input shaft bearing is fine. So wiggle this up and down, wiggle it side to side. There's no movement here. This input shaft bearing seems fine. The diff, you want to push it around. There's no play in there. If you have an axle, it'll be great. Stick it in there and just wiggle it around to see if there is. I did do that with my spare axle. I shoved it in there and wiggled it around. There isn't any play. At least nothing that's excessive like my current car. So now you basically, we spun it in neutral. It's smooth. You want to put it into every single gear with a screwdriver. So, obviously you twist it this way and you pull back is first. Remember, it's opposite, right? So as you're kind of shifting in the car, you're shifting and you're putting in first. That's actually pulling the rod back. So you put it into the side, and hang on. Let me just put it on a tripod and I'll show you guys. Hang on. All right, so now you basically want to shift it into first or any of the gears. So right now, just make sure that it is in neutral. So yeah, 3 clicks. So that's neutral. You check that this spins perfectly fine. Now you want to check first gear. So you spin it here and you pull back. There you go, first gear. And then you start spinning this. Spin it both ways. Usually you spin it counterclockwise. If you spin it counterclockwise, this is where you'll feel the resistance. So this feels smooth. Put it back into first. Neutral. And then you can shift in second. And then you spin it. So as you get into the gears, you actually end up feeling more and more resistance. That's not a bad thing. It's just you know, it's spinning a bigger shaft, it's bigger gears, etc., etc. All right. So this feels fine. There's no binding. Everything runs smooth. So that's fine. So that basically, I'm not going to go through all the gears with you guys, but you basically shift to all the gears, including reverse and all that stuff, and you spin the shaft, and you determine that, you know, if there is any play or anything like that, or if it feels rough, grinding, this doesn't feel abnormal. It feels kind of like, I mean, there is some sort of resistance, like a bearing, but there's no play in that. But it's not a bad idea to replace this bearing, by the way. I'm going to be rebuilding one of these transmissions, either the one in my car or this one. So probably best to, once I pull it apart, kind of determine that. But that's basically how you would check if a transmission is good or not. Make sure it doesn't get stuck or anything. And after you buy the transmission, all you want to do is clean it up, open up the casing, and then do a visual inspection inside. Get a Honda manual and kind of go over the steps. I'll probably be ripping this apart a little later, and I'll go show you guys the steps of inspecting the synchros and all that kind of stuff. But for now, basically, this is all you can really do, is just do a visual inspection of the car, of the transmission. All right, guys, so right here is where I prepped it and got it ready for me to wash this thing down. So I didn't want water getting into these holes, so I just got some bolts and put them in. These thread in. I plugged this up. I used some saran wrap to just wrap up some of the paper towel and all that stuff so that it shoves in there tight and creates somewhat of a waterproof seal. I used basically rags this time around, and I also bagged this up a little bit with saran wrap so that it doesn't get water in there as well. So I'm just gonna go over and degrease the whole thing, and I'll show you guys what it looks like currently. It's pretty dirty. It's not significantly dirty, not as bad as my old transmission, but it's greasy. You can see some grease marks on it. So what I'm gonna do is just wash this all down. And I'll show you guys what it looks like after I finish washing it. But I'm basically going to be using super clean again to clean the transmission. Hopefully it'll just turn out spotless afterwards. So this is the transmission, all nice and washed up and clean now. Well, as clean as it can be. And I'm just kind of angling it so that all the water leaks out and dries. I already blew it dry with some compressed air, but now I just have to sit for a few days to let all the actual water that is on there dry up. But this is as clean as it can be. I know I can just paint it with some engine paint, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm not a fan of that. Alright guys, so that's basically it. I've washed the transmission. It's all clean now. So all that's left to do is for me to crack that case open and inspect the inside. Likely I'm going to be replacing the input shaft bearing and all that stuff, but I have to measure out the kit that I need so that I can order it, and then I'll start replacing the bearings. But for now, I'm just going to let it dry, and I'm probably going to put it in a bag and put it to the side of my garage or something and continue with the body work. But that's basically it for the transmission. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. And if you haven't already, please comment, like, and subscribe, and maybe share my videos. As always, guys, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.